Welcome to Inclusive Academia's deep dive into the ASD Affinity Program at Defiance College with the program's director, Clarissa Barnes. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to Defiance College.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Clarissa Barnes. I'm an associate professor of special education and the director of the Hench Autism Studies program here at Defiance College. I got my master's in behavior analysis and therapy and my PhD in rehabilitation with an emphasis in behavior analysis, both from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And I actually came to Defiance because of the opportunity to start and then work with the ASD Affinity Program. So prior to my arrival at Defiance College already had their Hench Autism Studies program. They had a minor in Autism Studies for undergraduate students, a partnership with local city schools serving high school students who are autistic, and then also a summer program for middle and high school students with autism spectrum disorder. And so this was really the next opportunity for the college to identify and meet a need in the autistic community that was not being met. So that was back in 2013 when I first started here. Our program launched in 2014. Prior to coming here to work with the Affinity Program, I had been working at a boarding school for students with complex learning disabilities, including autism. And that boarding school actually had also a kind of sister program that was a college program that worked really closely with the community college in that area and then Southern Illinois University. And so I had some experience looking at what this looks like to be a separate entity that serves these students versus part of a program that is part of a college. So it was really exciting for me to come to Defiance and be able to look at how do we translate some of the practices that are successful in other programs to a college the size of Defiance College.
Please tell us a bit more about Defiance College and the surrounding community of Defiance, Ohio.
We are a small school, so we're a small private liberal arts college. We serve about 650 students. And about 65% of our traditional students live on campus. So we are a residential campus. In addition to being a small school, we are in a fairly small community. So the population of Defiance is around 17,000. We're a fairly rural community. But the good news is campus, though we're in a small town, is close to a lot of the amenities that we need so students can get access to grocery stores and restaurants and those sorts of things.
What is the general design and approach of the ASD Affinity Program?
Yeah, absolutely. Our program is run through a peer support model. So every student who's a part of our program has at least one peer support staff. Some students have multiple depending on how much support they need and what their goals are. And then students also meet with our program coordinator, who's our professional staff. And the goals of our program really vary by student. Of course, every student comes to college with the goal to do well academically and to graduate. So that's kind of an underlying goal. But what we're working on session to session with each student is going to vary based on what they need and where they are in their college career. So when students first get to campus, for example, the primary goal is let's help and support that student to get acclimated to campus and start to build their own structure and routine so that they can be successful here on campus, because it is so different moving from high school where your day is fairly structured by teachers and adults into college where you really have to put that structure in yourself. Once students have acclimated and they're doing well, then we start looking at goals related to how are we going to prepare for field experiences or internships in your major, looking at how we can make sure students are getting connected to campus socially with others who share their interests. And then, of course, as we approach graduation, the goals shift into what comes after graduation. Are there different types of supports that a student might need to be connected to back where, home, if they're moving back home or wherever they're moving to? Have we done what we need to do in terms of preparation for career related to things like resume, cover letter, mock interviews, those sorts of things? And so we're always trying to work with the student to look at what is that next step and where does that student see themselves, because it is slightly different for each student.
How often do ASD Affinity students meet with the program support staff?
Peer support staff meet with students usually anywhere from 1 to 3 times per week. And then our program coordinator also meets with students anywhere from 1 to 2 times per week. So students in our program could see somebody Monday through Friday, once each day from our program. Other students only see folks from our program about twice a week. And those sessions can last anywhere from about 20 minutes up to about an hour and 15 minutes, depending on what's happening in those sessions. We do provide what we call kind of wraparound support. So we absolutely can work with students on kind of executive functioning type skills, looking at time management, how are they going to break assignments down. We also work with students, as I mentioned, to make sure they're connected socially on campus. And then we can work with students as needed to support them in their residence hall. So how we determine what to work on is based on what we see as a need and then what the student agrees that they would like to work on with our program. There are 2 requirements for our program that are kind of non-negotiables. One is that we do ask that every student create a time management plan with their peer support staff. And that time management plan is really related to accomplishing and completing assignments that are related to their coursework and scheduling any necessary meetings throughout the week. And so that's just to make sure everybody knows what they're going to be doing when during the week. And then we also ask that students find one ongoing social opportunity. So we're not going to dictate who the student is connecting with, but we want to see that they found a club or an organization or group of peers that they can connect with regularly that share their interests. So the biggest goal is that we want to find some like a group of people this student can connect with because they have a shared interest. And so we have, some students who maybe are part of the music program. And so their peer group tends to be other people in the music program. So they might have a music minor, but they're also in the choir and they're in the community band and they do a lot of fun things together. So that's more of that formal opportunity. Who are really interested maybe in anime, and there isn't a formal anime club on campus right now, but they know that there's a group of like 3 other students who get together and enjoy the same thing, and so they can get together with that group of students just socially, not as part of a formal club or any.
How do most of your students discover the ASD Affinity Program?
We have families who find us through a number of ways. So we have tried to make sure our program is on as many directories as possible. Different sites have different directories of college programs. One really great one is through the College Autism Network. And so they have a pretty comprehensive list of all support programs across the United States. We also have been working really hard to get into contact with high school guidance counselors and intervention specialists to make them aware that not only our program exists, but these programs in general exist. We've seen an increase in support programs, both community colleges and four-year institutions over the past 5 years or so. And so we're really working hard to make sure that families know this is an option. So they can start planning early and start looking at, fit for them. So it's sometimes finding out through their high school, but oftentimes it's parents doing the research on their own or students doing the research on their own in terms of how they come to us.
What does the application process to the ASD Affinity Program entail?
The application process for us is parallel to the Defiance College applications. So all students in our program are degree-seeking Defiance College students. So the first process is for students to apply to and be accepted to Defiance College. We can begin processing their application, and that application includes an electronic application that the student completes. We also ask that they have one support person. And so oftentimes that's a parent, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any person that the student would like to fill out that part of the application for them. We do ask for 2 letters of recommendation from people who can. And then we also ask for a psychoeducational evaluation. And then if the student has an IEP or a 504 plan, we ask for their most recent IEP. Once we have all of that information, we look through that information, try and gather up. And then after that, we schedule an interview with the student. The interview includes the student and whomever they'd like to bring with them. So again, a lot of students bring their parents. We've had some students bring in maybe their high school intervention specialist, whoever they think could really speak to their support needs, because the point of the interview is really trying to round out that picture of who we think the student is based on the paperwork we have, and then hearing from their perspective what supports are working, what support might they be looking for that they have not yet received, and really trying to determine, can we provide what that student needs, and is what that student needs the type of support that our program offers. So we're really looking for that fit between the level of support needed and the type of support needed.
How does the ASD Affinity Program work with other Defiance College departments?
Yeah, so our program, like many support programs, and it kind of varies. Our program, though, is not part of like accessibility services. We are a standalone program. And the reason that's important from our perspective and philosophy is we are meant to support students in navigating and gaining access to all of these other offices. We do not replace any of those. So with accessibility services, we work with students in our program from the time they're accepted to start building a relationship with that office. And so we'll help set up the initial meeting between the student and accessibility service. Accessibility services is going to be the office that determines what accommodations that student is granted, and then communicates to the student how they can access those accommodations, because it is so different in high school where you have to seek the accommodations and then advocate for use of them. So what our program does is not only help to make the connection with that office, but then we support the students in then using those accommodations. And as an example, if a student has testing in a quiet environment and extended time on tests as an accommodation, there's a process for using that accommodation on campus that requires that student to make contact with both accessibility services and the faculty of the class 72 hours in advance so that they can make the arrangements to take that test. So our program comes in part of that time management schedule and helping that student see, okay, if you have, a test coming up later this week, we need to make sure we send those emails by this day. And so we can really support this. How do I advocate for my accommodations and make sure that I'm kind of thinking ahead and planning to use those accommodations?
What are the costs associated with the ASD Affinity Program?
So we do have a fee. It is $3,100 per academic year, and it's charged by semester. So students do pay that fee to be a part of our program, and that is in addition to.
What are some of the changes families should be prepared for when their students start college?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question because it's one of the biggest changes for a lot of families. Particularly if families are working with a student who's receiving special education services in high school, oftentimes those services can come with an increase in communication for families. And so college is a big shift where the communication decreases pretty drastically. On privacy laws, in particular, the Family Education Right and Privacy Act, or FERPA, we cannot communicate with students' parents without a student's permission. So students in our program have the option to sign a release. Once they sign that release, they can let us know who they would like us to give information to, and then we are able to communicate with parents that way. If a student has signed a release and given us permission to communicate with their parents, our program's philosophy is that we do not communicate with parents in the absence of the student. So any communication we have with parents is something that we do our best to include students on. If a parent is to, call me, and obviously the student's not right with me in my office, I'll still take that phone call if I have permission to speak with them from the student, but I'm always going to update the student on what that communication was. Our goal is for the family to communicate with the student directly and really just include us as needed as part of that team, rather than have the communication be between program and family without the student. Our standard is, we welcome, if we have permission to speak to families, for families to reach out to us anytime they have a concern. So if there's a question they have, if they've identified a concern that they're not sure we're aware of with their student, we definitely welcome that communication. In terms of us reaching out, we're going to reach out to families generally 2 to 3 times per semester for general updates. And then we also will reach out, of course, if there's a concern where we think, the family as part of that student's team is going to be best to help us navigate what that is. But again, always in conjunction with that student. when we send updates to families, for example, so those 2 to 3 times per semester, those are email updates. And we always include the student on those email updates, and the student is welcome to ask us, not to share something with their family if it's not something that they want them to know at that time. So it's a big transition, I think, for both parties to kind of navigate what does this different level of privacy for the student look like as they're, moving into young adulthood, and there's less communication directly between the program and parents.
What are some of the key skills you see in ASD Affinity students who find success in college?
Yeah, I think there's a couple pieces. One really important piece that we've found, and it's not necessarily, I think we all think about this when we're looking at college, is looking at academic preparedness and really looking at what was that student's high school experience in terms of academics and the level of support they may have received. When a student comes to college, one of the biggest differences academically is going to be in high school. A student who's receiving special education services can receive both accommodations and modifications. And the difference between accommodations and modifications are that modifications are going to fundamentally change that task for that student. So it's no longer the same thing that everybody else is doing, it's a modified version of what everybody else is doing. When a student comes to college, they are, if they're registered with accessibility services, then they are eligible for accommodations, but not those modifications. So as an example, if a student is used to something like a reduced number of choices on a multiple choice test or a shorter assignment, that's not something that's going to be available to them at college, even if it was available in high school. And so really making sure that the students have had a high school experience that's going to prepare them for college level academics, particularly at a school like Defiance College, where we're not offering any remedial academic classes and that sort of thing. Outside of the academic piece, we're also really looking at the level of autonomy that a student has. And so how successful has that student been prior to coming to college, making sure that they're getting up and getting themselves ready in the morning to get to class, making sure that when they get back to their residence hall at the end of the day, that, if they've got a plan to, first they're going to read chapters 1 and 2 for their history class, and then they're going to be able to engage in, whatever their activity of choice is, whether it's video games or watching YouTube videos or hanging out with other people in the residence hall. Can they manage that schedule as long as they put that structure together for themselves? Sometimes we'll have students who are, here, and this is true for all students, not just students in our program, who maybe haven't had to manage their own time as successfully before, because it's always, again, kind of been managed by the adults in their lives. So they were in school 8 hours a day, they came home, parents made sure they did their homework. Parents were the ones reminding them to, hey, you need to turn off the electronics and get to bed. But that's really all got to be on the student. And so looking at, is that student building the capacity to do that? And then what tools does that student have in place to do that? So, we're really specific, and it's about building autonomy, not independence, because you can absolutely use the supports available to you, but you've got to be willing to use them and then actually put them in place. So as an example, if you're going to have an Amazon Alexa that's going to remind you, hey, at 10:30, you really need to start turning things off and getting ready for bed because you have an 8 a.m. class tomorrow, then use your Amazon Alexa to do that. You don't have to do that without those supports.
What are some keys for students who want to have a positive experience with your program?
Absolutely. So I think the number one thing that makes all the difference is a student's willingness to ask for help when they've identified that they need it, but also to accept help when it is offered. We have found that students kind of, it's obviously not a completely dichotomous organization, but we have some students who are really resistant to asking for help and accepting help because they feel very strongly that they should be able to do something on their own. And then we have other students who are very open to asking for help and willing to accept it when it's offered and kind of try different solutions to problems that they encounter. And it's really that willingness to ask for help and try different solutions that makes all the difference for students. And again, it's not just students in our program who get here and realize, oh, I didn't know that this was something I was going to have a hard time with, or I wasn't sure that this was, an expectation, and how do I navigate this now? And one of the benefits of our program, and the point in part of our program, is our peer support staff and our program coordinator are those people who our students can, develop a relationship with, come to and say, hey, I'm having whatever the problem is. and I don't know who can help me solve this problem or what I need to do. And so, as I mentioned, we don't replace the other services on campus, but we can help direct that student to, oh, here are all of the options if this is the problem you're facing. And an example of that, right, might be a student who takes a class and they're like, oh, you know what, I'm really good at math. This math class is going to be a breeze. I'm excited about this class. And they get into the math class, and for one reason or another, it is not going as well as they thought it would be. So identifying the problem of like, okay, I'm not doing as well in this math class as I thought I would be, relaying that problem to us, and then we can start to talk about, here are the different options, right? Have you talked to your professor during their office hours to ask what else you might be able to do related to preparing for class? Have you sought supplemental instruction through the Academic Support Center or individual math content tutoring through that center? And so our program can help them identify what are the solutions to the problem, but then also, how do I get access to those solutions? So being willing to do that makes all the difference in the world for our students. Students who only want to, kind of receive the help once there's a real kind of significant problem, it tends to be more difficult because, again, that transition from high school to college, if you don't ask for help until, you've failed through midterm in a class, then it's going to be much more difficult to recover that grade than if you ask for help after the first assignment or test or bad grade that you get or indication of struggling in that class. So we always are encouraging our students to be proactive and, trying to be really supportive in the way that we ask students questions about their classes or, their connections on campus, so that we can help them to identify problems before they become more difficult to solve.
And to wrap things up, can you point to any specific student success stories?
In terms of success stories, we've got plenty of success stories. So our program has served right around 25 students since it started in 2014. And students use our program in a variety of ways. So some of our students start with us their first year and they stay with us through graduation. Some students start their first year and leave our program, but stay at Defiance College and graduate from the college. And then other students have actually transferred from other schools to Defiance to begin our program partway through their college career and then stay with us through graduation. So, the success looks different for every student. Of those 25 students, we've got about a 56% graduation rate. And a good handful of our students have graduated and gone on to get jobs in their field. I would say some of the biggest successes we have for students are students who really make that transition from getting here, going from very adult directed services and not really knowing, hey, what are my strengths? Where are my areas of support? How do I communicate that to, by the time they're in their second year here, they're navigating all of their supports.
Thank you to Clarissa Barnes and the Defiance College ASD Affinity Program. For more information on the program, please visit the URL below. And remember to subscribe to our channel for more great content from inclusive academia.